Shalom, everyone, and welcome to the fourth program in the Talking Memory series, The Holocaust in Romania, Filling in the Gaps. Today's program will focus on survival strategies of children, the case of Jewish orphans in Transnistria. My name is Medin Shachar, and I work at the Ghetto Fighters House as an educator and a guide, and I will be your host for today's program. I want to welcome our global audience, with a special welcome, as always, to the survivors and their families that are with us today. We want to thank everyone for their support and interest in our programs. I say this every time for the past 3 years, and it's true, and I will continue saying the same thing. Thank you so much for your support. This series is in partnership with A.M.I.R organization in Israel, the Romanian Cultural Institute in Tel Aviv, the Wilhelm Filderman Center for the Study of Jewish History in Romania, the Elie Wiesel National Institute for Studying the Holocaust in Romania, Classrooms Without Borders, Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, and the Rabin Chair Forum at George Washington University. For this series, we have, in addition to our regular partners, 4 partner institutions connected to Romania, 2 in Israel and 2 in Romania. We have invited representatives from each institution to give the opening remarks on one of the 4 programs and share with our audience their work. Today, we are honored to have Elinor Kroitoru, who will give the opening remarks. She recently replaced Eyal Fabian, who you saw on the invitation, as the COO of A.M.I.R, the Association of Romanian Jewry in Israel. We wish Eyal much success in his new endeavor and thank him for helping to bring this series to fruition. And now a little information about Elinor Kroitoru. She is an Israeli-based researcher and consultant, specializing in archival management and commemoration with a focus on Holocaust-era archives and restitution. For 11 years, she led the research division at Hashava, Israel's governmental body for restitution of Holocaust victims' assets. Subsequently, she served as deputy head of the archives division at Yad Vashem. Along with her position at A.M.I.R, she is one of the founders of the Romanian Jewish Heritage Archive in Israel. Elinor earned her law degree from Tel Aviv University and an MA in public policy from the Reichman University. Elinor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Medin, and good evening, everyone. I'm very excited to open this meeting of Talking Memory. I've been following the program of Talking Memory since it began in COVID times a long time ago, and it is a wonderful reoccurring program, and I'm very happy that A.M.I.R has a part in this series, which is also important because it talks about the Shoah, the Holocaust of the Romanian Jewry, one of the less known Holocaust eras we've all spoken about Poland, we know about Germany, about Western Europe and some of Eastern Europe, but the Romanian Holocaust has been less spoken of. So we're very happy of this spotlight on this very dark and complicated times in the life of the Romanian Jewry. And a lot of research has been done in the past years, and it's very exciting that it's being unveiled here in this very important platform. Today's meeting, speaking of children, always a part of the story that is maybe less told, and a part that is, I think, very important to show the bravery and the wit of young children that have to go through terrible times. So I really thank the Ghetto Fighters House and the Ghetto Fighters House Archive for its important work in telling the story of the Romanian Holocaust. And I urge all of you who are looking for information about your families, the Ghetto Fighters House Archive is a very, very important place to look for information about your relatives. They have a very, very good archive. I thank the speakers today, and on behalf of A.M.I.R, I wish everyone a very pleasant and interesting evening. Thank you, Medin.
And thank you very much, and to A.M.I.R. And we are going to continue. For each program in this series, we will have a short presentation about an artifact, document, or testimony from the Ghetto Fighters House archives that is connected to the Holocaust in Romania. And those of you who have been following us through this series already know that today Greta Barak, who is an archivist at the Ghetto Fighters House, will be presenting today. And just a few words about Greta. Greta holds an MA in Jewish Studies awarded by Babeș-Bolyai University in Romania, and a second MA in Israel Studies awarded by the University of Haifa. She is currently enrolled in the Archival and Information Science Diploma program at Tel Aviv University. She worked as an independent researcher at Hashava with Elinor, I understand, and she was involved in historical, genealogical, and archival research on Holocaust victims in northern Transylvania. After relocating to Israel, she conducted historical research on the Holocaust in Romania in a law firm, mainly for legal support of Holocaust survivors, compensations claims from Germany and Romania. Greta is a full-time archivist at the Ghetto Fighters House. She is involved in several cataloging and digitization projects of archival materials, including archival collections concerning the history of Romanian Jewry, as well as providing reference services and assistance for all researchers and the general public. Greta, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Medine, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I will try to share my PowerPoint presentation right now. As Medine already mentioned, at the beginning of each webinar from this series, me or someone else from the archive will share a story from the Ghetto Fighters House archive. Today, I'll be talking about a collection of children testimonies collected in Romania between 1946 and 1947 by Hersh Segal, a Holocaust survivor originally from northern Bukovina, who moved after the Second World War to Bacău. Some general information about Hersh Segal. Segal was born in 1905 in Novi Strilișcea, Galicia, but he lived together with his family in Putila, northern Bukovina, at that time part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. At the outset of the First World War, his family fled to Prague, where they lived as refugees until 1917, when they relocated to Czernowitz. As everyone knows, between the two wars, Czernowitz was part of Romania. Segal studied mathematics as a major and physics as a minor at the Czernowitz University and graduated around 1930. After his military service in the Romanian army in Botoșani, he returned to Czernowitz, where he worked as a school teacher. We actually don't have a lot of information concerning his fate during the war, but we know that he managed to remain in Czernowitz and not be deported to Transnistria. In 1946, he moved to Bacău, Romania, where he worked as a mathematics school teacher until his immigration to Israel in 1962. Throughout his life, Hersh Segal showed a fervent dedication to both literary and cultural pursuits. Besides his regular mathematics lessons in Czernowitz, he gave lectures on Jewish literature and history. He took an active part in the intellectual Jewish milieu of Czernowitz and significantly contributed to the field of Yiddish literature by editing and publishing works of Yiddish poets and Bukovinian artists. You can see on the right side of the slide a part of a list with Hersh Segal contributions written by Eliezer Podriacic in 1984. I'm just going to mention one example. He edited the Sechs Schlaflieder, the Six Lullabies, in 1939, published in Czernowitz, which is a collection of poems written by various Yiddish writers, among them Itzik Manger and Moishe Leib Halperin. This collection included Leibu Levin's melodies to the poems and drawings by the Jewish artist Iziu Sher. Now, going back to our collection, I will try to give you an overview of the materials and to answer some of the following questions. What is the provenance of the children testimonies from the Hersh Segal collection? What is the nature of this testimony? And what does this collection actually includes? Well, after the war, while working as a mathematics school teacher in Bacău, Hersh Segal encouraged child Holocaust survivors he was teaching to write about their wartime experiences in Transnistria. Some of these testimonies were collected in 1946 at the Jewish orphanage in Bacău, and the rest in 1947 at the Jewish school in Gura Humorului with the help of the teacher Rachel Hasenfratz. Actually, she was teaching Hebrew there. The children were aged 12 to 18 at the time, and some of them never went to school. They wrote about their experiences in the ghettos and camps of Transnistria between 1941 and 1944 and following their liberation. Most of the children wrote in Yiddish, but you can find some testimonies in Yiddish with Latin alphabet and even in Romanian. For a better understanding of the collecting process, I would like to read you a short fragment from Rachel Hasenfratz's letter to Hersh Segal from May 1947. Our director assigned us a task on your behalf. The children should describe their memories and experiences in Transnistria. As you know, now is the time for writing papers, and our students are busy reading a lot of materials. Despite this, almost everyone completed the task. We send you the original without corrections to keep it close to the truth. There are certainly many errors, but in our opinion, the very thing that they could sit down and write is already progress. Until a few months ago, almost everyone did not know the alphabet. Anyway, the children and I, their teacher, ask for your forgiveness for the mistakes. Day by day, we are getting better. Warm greetings from someone who greatly appreciates any endeavor which expands the treasure of our beautiful literature. We can have an idea of the format of the task given to the children, as some of them wrote down the instructions they received. You have on the screen 2 examples. On the left, a page from Ita Foy's testimony, and on the right, a page from Miriam Haas' testimony, both of them written in 1947 in Gura Humorului. We can see that the children were asked, first of all, to write down their name, place of birth, and birthday. Afterwards, they were told to write a composition with the title, The Most Important Experiences in Recent Years, the Most Terrible and the Most Beautiful One. This title comes up in many of the children's testimonies from the collection, including in the one collected in Bacău. The written works had to refer to 5 different aspects. Namely, the children had to write down memories from Transnistria. They had to mention the experience of the occupation. The orphans were asked to write when and how were their parents killed. Also to write down memories of the deportation, of the evacuation. And another element, they were asked to write songs and stories they had heard during their time in Transnistria. Of course, not all the children refer to all the aspects that they were given. Actually, the more testimonies you read, the more you understand that even if the structure is there, the teachers allow the writing to be fluid and follow the child's perception of the events. The length of the testimonies differs too. You have testimonies that are 1 page, but you also have ones that are 3, 4, 5 pages long. I would like to read you a short fragment from Ita Freud's testimony in order to get a better understanding of our collection. Ita was deported in fall 1941 from Gura Humorului to Ataki, and from there she was sent with her family to Mogile Podolski in Transnistria. And I'm reading from the translation. At Mogilev, my father made an effort and immediately found an apartment. And we were supposed to move there. We wanted to move, and then, instead of that, a Romanian soldier wanted to shot dead. As soon as my sisters and I saw it, we started crying, and we were very lucky that the soldier showed mercy to our cries and kept my father alive. One day, my father comes home from work with a headache and fever. My poor mother was frightened and ran to the doctor. The doctor came and treated Dad. Dad was moved to a room for the sick. A few days later, we learned that father was sick with typhus. One evening, complications were discovered. They did everything to save Dad. They operated on him. Unfortunately, the surgery did not help at all. He was operated again, but it didn't help. His last words were, "What will my poor children do? Stay healthy, my children." He said this to my mother and closed his eyes forever. If I wanted to describe his death, I could write a novel of several volumes. Ita finishes her work with the following song. I'm going to read to you an approximate translation. You can actually see marked on the slide with blue the title of the song. Orphans walking, driven by hunger, begging at doors for a piece of bread, the people who angrily close their eyes do not want to know the length of their misery. As orphans are walking, driven by hunger, asking for mercy, a piece of bread, frozen people fall on the streets and people walk by without a look. If you look at the page, you'll actually see that she didn't write the song as we are used. One sentence, she actually wrote the words one after the other, like a composition. And also, Segal found out years later that actually the words of the song were of Reli Blai from the Woods and not Ita's own words. The batch of testimonies has a story of its own. In 1958, Segal gave the entire collection to the Yiddish poet Naftali Herz-Cohn, so he would take it with him to Poland and from there send it to Israel. Cohn took the material, but when he arrived to Poland, the secret police arrested him and confiscated the testimonies. After his release, they were returned to him. Later on, after Cohn's arrival to Israel, he returned the materials to Segal. In the beginning of the 80s, Segal decides to publish the materials. For the first booklet, he is choosing 9 testimonies. The children were from Gura Humorului, Hotin, Părtești, Cernăuți, Făltice, and Dorohoi, and the testimonies were collected both in Bacău and Gura Humorului. He called the edition Children Testify About Transnistria, Answers to a Survey Conducted in Romania in 1946 and 1947. And categorized it as research materials of the Holocaust in Romania. He transcribed the selected handwritten testimonies, but also included in the booklet facsimiles of the original side by side to the transcriptions. The orthography of the children was not changed for the booklet. Segal's preoccupation with keeping as close as possible to the original is clear, and it corresponds with Rachel Hasenfrat's letter. He sees the children's testimonies as valuable and authentic primary materials for the study of the Holocaust. Furthermore, he also saw in them valuable literary materials. Segal includes in the booklet songs written by the children, which he mentions in the introduction that they were all composed and sung in Transnistria, that the children actually sang those songs to him after the war, but he didn't have the opportunity to write down the musical notes at the time. The first booklet was almost ready for printing. At the end of January 1982, Segal had to finish the table of content and review the booklet once more time. Unfortunately, he passed away on 1st of February 1982. His brother, Gershon Segal, published the manuscript the same year in Rehovot. His brother also published a second collection, including 16 of the testimonies in 1984. At the time the second booklet came out, the family had already deposited the original materials to the Ghetto Fighters House archive. The Segal collection includes today around 85 testimonies, all of which went through the digitization process and are available on the Ghetto Fighters House archive online. What you heard today is just the preliminary part of a study I'm writing about the collection. Nevertheless, I do think more historians and people interested in the subject should know that this collection exists. I want to finish by thanking to our volunteers who translated from Yiddish to Hebrew over the years the materials from this collection. And actually, this was a big help and facilitated the accessibility of this collection to the general public. Thank you.
And once again, Greta, thank you for an interesting presentation. There are already a few questions in the chat box. I think one of them was already answered about the language, that it was Yiddish and not Hebrew, but it was from right to left. So with that said, Greta, look at the questions in the chat box, and we're going to move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Patricia Heberer Rice, who will give us an introduction to the coping mechanisms of children during the Holocaust, a subject that is close to my heart personally as a Holocaust educator in the first and only children's museum for children about Jewish children during the Holocaust, Yad L'Yeled at the Ghetto Fighters House. I am honored to introduce Dr. Heberer Rice and looking forward to her presentation, but beforehand, a short intro. Dr. Heberer Rice is the senior historian and director of the Office of the Senior Historian in the Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies, the academic wing of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. There she functions as a specialist on medical crimes and eugenics policies in Nazi Germany, in addition to contributions to several USHMM publications. She is the author of Children During the Holocaust, a volume in the Center series, Documenting Life and Destruction, 2011. A further publication, Atrocities on Trial, The Politics of Prosecuting War Crimes in Historical Perspective, co-edited with Jürgen Matthaus, appeared in 2008 with the University of Nebraska Press. And with that, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nadine. Thank you for inviting me to speak, and thanks to all of your colleagues at the Ghetto Fighters House. I'm so happy to be delivering these opening remarks, which to the start of what I think will be this fascinating panel. And now, hopefully, I will be able to share my screen. So here we go with our opening remarks. Approximately 1.5 million Jewish children were murdered in the Holocaust. Millions of youngsters, Jews and non-Jews, suffered persecution, deprivation, and dislocation at the hands of the National Socialists, the Nazis, and their wartime allies. The study of children during the Shoah is a history in microcosm. It's the story of the Holocaust as seen through the eyes of its youngest victims. With notable exceptions, the contours and chronology of Nazi racial policy ran parallel for children and adults. Just as their parents, Jewish youngsters suffered discrimination, ghettoization, deportation, and mass murder. Yet, understandably, children encountered and contended with Nazi persecutory policies in markedly different ways. Today, in these brief remarks, I'd like to explore the world of the child, the ways in which youngsters manage the menacing world around them, illustrating their experiences in their own voices. Learning is an essential and indispensable part of childhood. The school years, part of the youngster's rite of passage to adulthood. Yet in German-occupied Europe, majority of Jewish children were denied the possibility of a formal education. In November 1939, just weeks after the capitulation of the Polish army, German officials in the general government, that is in German-occupied Poland, banned Jewish children from public and private schools, with very few exceptions. As in the case of the Lodz Ghetto, prohibitions or severe restrictions upon formal instruction for Jewish children remained in effect when Jewish populations were ghettoized in Poland and other occupied territories in Eastern Europe. Yet thousands of school-aged children defied such bans by attending a network of clandestine schools in many ghetto communities. Many underground classrooms gathered in soup kitchens, orphanages, and care institutions for young people. Other less formally organized schools met secretly in the homes, the private homes of instructors or their pupils. For ghetto youngster Paula Rothschild, meeting in her clandestine study group gave her a sense of identity and purpose. Teenagers like Paula came to feel that emotional and intellectual survival was integral to their physical survival. Such secret study was quite literally an escape into learning. These lessons were our happiness, Rothschild recalled, our oblivion. Outside, there was a war storm, the groans of people dying of hunger. And somewhere in the corner of the room on Pavia or Nevolimsky Street, some girls between 15 and 13 years of age were sitting around a table with their teacher, engaged in studying. They forgot about the whole world, even about the fact that they were a bit hungry, maybe more than a little bit. Like learning, play provided a powerful outlet, and children used both to adapt to their different circumstances and to restore a sense of normalcy to their disordered lives. The juxtaposition of child's play with the tragic events of the Holocaust presents us with a striking juxtaposition. Instinctively, we balk at the suggestion that mass murder and the games of childhood could exist side by side. And yet scores of contemporary documents and the vivid recollection of survivors and bystanders showed that they did. To run with their playmates, to act out their fantasies, and explore the world about them gave children a powerful way to escape the harsh realities that surrounded them. Play also represented a way for youngsters to adapt to the difficulties which confronted them and reshape their terrifying world into safer contours. As in normal times, children utilize play activities to develop needed skill sets and socialize themselves to future mature roles and responsibilities. Youngsters in camps and ghetto settings lived in a kind of exile from childhood. With the loss of their home and belongings, young children felt the absence of their favorite playthings acutely. Children fortunate enough to retain a cherished toy or childhood possession often clung to them with a fierce possessiveness. Such toys offered not only amusement, they were also a source of emotional stability and security. In a menacing world, material items remain steadfast and unchanging. Toys were good listeners in a way that harried and exhausted adults were not. Even broken and damaged playthings retained their currency. They did not wither away from hunger or face deportation as parents and siblings did. A toy might also transport its small owner into an imaginary world far away from the charnel surroundings of the camp and ghetto. Children also invented new modes of play in order to accommodate their difficult circumstances and reflect their altered reality. To the horror of adult contemporaries, children's new games often accurately depicted the dramas and tragedies of ghetto and camp life. Many Jewish children had never known a park or a playground or owned a doll or a stuffed animal. So they constructed their make-believe world from the only existence that they knew. A favorite game of both genders was cups and rubbers. The favorite game of both genders was Jews and Germans, a game which wed aspects of cops and robbers with the traditional hide and seek. An 8-year-old inhabitant of the Vilna Ghetto explained to onlookers how young children emulated a roundup for deportation. Quote, part of the children became policemen and part Germans. The third group were Jews, who were to hide in makeshift bunkers, that is, under tables, chairs, in barrels, in garbage cans. If a dressed-up policeman happened to find Jewish children, he handed them over to the Germans. While this kind of play was unconventional and shocked adult observers, such activities presumably helped young children to process the perplexing conditions they encountered and offered youngsters a kind of buffered learning, as George Eisen has written, a way to rehearse a dangerous situation within a secure sphere. Like learning and play, innocence is another element associated with childhood. In a conventional sense, innocence stems from the ignorance of evil and an absence of worldliness and guile. Yet living in the upside-down world of the ghetto or concentration camp, many children had become well acquainted with evil and understood that guilelessness and naivete could prove a deadly combination. Draw what you see, Helga Weisova's father enjoined her shortly after her arrival in the Theresienstadt ghetto in December 1941. Helga, from an early age, occupied most of her time with drawing and painting. In the 3 years before her deportation from Theresienstadt to Auschwitz, she completed over 100 drawings and illustrations. At first, like here, she drew from nature scenes and memories of former times, but following her father's injunction, draw what you see, she soon began to capture the everyday life of the Theresienstadt ghetto. Helga comprehended the dangers of her new environment and resolved to commit them to paper and canvas. With a candidness that unsettles, the young teenager faithfully portrays the wrenching arrivals and departures of transports at Terezin, the unending lines to receive meager rations, the colonies of workers going to forced labor. A more subtle example, birthday wish number 1, seen here, seems at first to fulfill a childish yearning. A young boy and girl clad in their summer best push a giant confection from Prague. You can see back here the castle from Prague through the green landscape to the fortress walls of Theresienstadt. On the surface, the composition is a dreamlike vision, a fairy tale from childhood. But the scene bristles with dark humor. The cart which carries the mighty cake is a hearse. In another stroke of wit, the wagon bears the inscription Entsorgung, waste disposal. Even in the context of this youthful idol, Helga Weisova grasped where she was and what danger she was in. Another examination of innocence and knowledge in Holocaust childhood strikes out in different territory. Historians have recently taken note of the diary of Elizabeth Bloch, a young Jewish girl living in rural Bavaria in Germany. Elizabeth was no Bavarian Anne Frank, who described her experiences in vivid detail. Indeed, what makes her diary so interesting is that even in her darkest moments, Bloch appeared almost pathologically unable to record unpleasant developments. During Kristallnacht, her uncle had been murdered by SA men. an event referenced only in passing in her journal. Further disturbing developments: exclusion of Jewish pupils from public schools, the loss of the family home and business, the forcible sterilization of her father received similarly short shrift. On March 8, 1942, Elizabeth wrote this last entry in her journal. As usual, she focused on daily activities, on interactions with friends and family, and upon events that happened in her local community. Notably missing from Elizabeth's March 1942 entry is the issue, it's an October 1942 entry, I'm sorry about that, is the issue that the blocks faced imminent deportation. The exact date upon which they received their summons is unknown, but it's unclear, as the teenager wrote of her sleigh ride with friends. The family was already packing up their household and giving items of value to trusted neighbors. Bloch was 18 years old when she wrote this last passage in her diary and could scarcely have been in ignorance of the mass deportation of Jews from Germany. Was Elizabeth's silence on this point a matter of discretion or circumspection? Did her refusal to acknowledge menacing developments spring from denial or a naive belief that her family might be spared even as her co-religions went to their deaths? We'll never know. On the 3rd of April 1942, the Blochs were deported with 989 fellow Bavarian Jews to the Piaski ghetto. On an unknown date, Elizabeth and her family were transferred to a killing center, presumably Belzig or Sobibor, and murdered there. Children were very often powerless to shape their circumstances in the way that adults could. Children, though, found highly creative ways to cope through art and fantasy. And things like drawing that we saw earlier with Helga Vaisova served not only as a means of entertainment and escape. For very young children, such as the hidden child Ilona Goldman, it was sometimes the only means of communicating with absent family members. Young Ilona spent several months separated from her parents in Lvov. Because the 4-year-old couldn't yet write, she could not converse with her parents through letters. Instead, she communicated with them through a series of drawings, sketched, get this, on the reverse side of her rescuer's weekly correspondence with the Goldmans. Now in the collection of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, Ilona Goldman's childhood drawings captured images of a village in which she hid, of peasants in the fields, animals ambling across green meadows, passengers, trains traversing the Polish countryside. Often the little girl heard complaints from local farmers about shortages of consumer items, especially cigarettes. In this drawing, Ilona rectifies the situation. As the residents of her household, her rescuer's household, engage in hunting for mushrooms, the men drag at their cigarettes. The farmer smokes. The chimney smokes. Yes, even the bird aloft in the sky seems to draw a few puffs. In Ilona's last months with her foster family, her rescue family, Gusta Goldman sacrificed a gold dental crown, every week for her only child's continued safety. Her husband prying each tooth from her mouth with the help of a Swiss Army knife. The Goldmans were very careful to pay their caretakers on schedule, for they had learned that the rescuer abandoned an earlier charge, a very young boy, to his death when the youngster's parents weren't able to pay for his upkeep. Thus, the Goldmans were doubly grateful to receive their daughter's tiny parcels. Besides the connection the pictures established between parents and child, Ilona's drawings served as an additional purpose. The pictures assured the Goldmans on a weekly basis that their daughter was alive. You can see in the drawing on the opposite side, you can see the handwriting from her rescuer answering the questions that the rescuer asked, that the Goldmans asked every week. And thus they knew that the drawing was for that particular week. In sum, whether through learning, play, art, flight into imagination, these means provided an important avenue for coping with the miseries of hunger, fear, and deprivation. A discussion concerning the everyday experiences of children during the Holocaust is, in fact, a discourse about the Shoah's youngest victims and survivors. And although many of those voices have been silenced, they still have much to tell us. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you so much for this introduction. It was so important. We thought when we were planning this program today that there'd be some sort of short introduction. I wish we had more time to hear more about coping methods. We even used a drawing of a child, Shoshana, Neumann for our invitation. Maybe Greta will say a few words about her a little later on, and when we finish, fascinating how she drew her pictures. So these coping mechanisms are really a very important part of how children dealt with their situation and trying to understand it. So thank you so much for sharing with us. And someone asked for your books, and I put them in the chat box, and I think I need to check if we have them in the library or not, so I can also read and learn more. So once again, thank you. And we are now going to move on to our final speaker, our last speaker, Dr. Anna Schulzel. And she will introduce us to the experiences of Jewish orphans who survived the dreadful conditions in Transnistria. I am especially moved to introduce Ionela, as we actually have met face-to-face. As many of you know, when we do Zoom programs, our speakers come from all over the world, and I have not met many of our speakers that come from countries that I haven't even visited. So today, Ionela actually is someone that I have met physically, and I'm so happy to have her with us today. We both studied for our MA degree at the Weissliebnat MA program at Haifa University, and it's a true privilege to invite classmates that have continued their studies, as opposed to me, and research concerning the Holocaust. So just a few words about Ionela. Ionela is a research and reference specialist at the Holocaust Survivors and Victims Resource Center of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. And I also want to really say thank you both to Patricia and to Ionela, and also Michael from our last program, who all come from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum to share their knowledge with us. As a researcher, she assists the families of Holocaust survivors and victims, as well as researchers and scholars who are seeking information and documentation about the fates of individuals during the Holocaust. She is a former Mandel Center Fellow, Erie Fellow, and recipient of the Claims Conference Saul Kagan Fellowship. She is also a former intern at the Ghetto Fighters House Archives and Yad Vashem Israel. Ionela graduated with a PhD in history from the University of Haifa in 2021. Her PhD dissertation is titled The Forgotten Child Survivors of the Romanian Holocaust, Jewish Orphans and Jewish Orphanages in Transnistria between 1941 and 1944. Her research interests and expertise are in the history of Jewish children and orphans in Transnistria during the Holocaust. And though I know about your research for many years, I never heard you give a presentation. So I am very excited for this talk. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maydeen. It's very good to see you. Hello, everyone. I would like to thank the Ghetto Fighters House Museum for inviting me to this event, and to applaud them for organizing a series on the Holocaust in Romania, because as Elinor mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, this is an under-researched subject and deserves more attention. So I'm really happy to see that the Ghetto Fighters House Museum is organizing events on this subject. I would like to extend my gratitude to our attendees. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Some of you might know we are celebrating Father's Day today. So I would like to dedicate this presentation to the memory of those Jewish fathers who perished in Transnistria during the Second World War. In the summer of 1941, as a result of an agreement between Hitler and his ally, Ion Antonescu, Romania gained control over a stretch of occupied Ukrainian territory known as Transnistria. Between 1941 and 1942, over 150,000 Romanian Jews were uprooted from their homes and deported to Transnistria. This short film is the only recording that we have of a deportation of Romanian Jews, and it shows this endless column of people being marched. And you've probably noticed that some of them, including children, are barefoot and they're struggling to carry whatever belongings they were able to bring with them on this long journey. And if you're interested in watching this video, you can actually access it on our museum's website. At the end of my presentation, I will send a few links. I will add them to the chat so you can just take a look there. And I'll include the link in the chat. What this video fails to depict is the violence, brutality, and abuses that took place during the deportation. We know from survivors and bystanders that on their long trek to Transnistria, the deportees were humiliated, beaten, and their few belongings were plundered. Here we have two post-war drawings made by child survivor Shoshana Neumann, who illustrates in her art some of the abuses that she and her family experienced during the deportation to Transnistria. The first artwork is part of our museum's archives, and the second one is part of the Ghetto Fighters House archives. And we'll see more of Shoshana Neumann's art throughout this presentation. We're very lucky to have this available as a source. Many Jews did not even reach Transnistria, as they died of exhaustion, or they were murdered by the guards for not keeping up with the pace of the column. Sometimes locals also participated in the murder of the Jews from the convoys. By the time they arrived in Transnistria, most Jewish families were already decimated, and the deportees, including children, witnessed and or experienced violence. The brutality of the deportation was a turning point in the lives of the young deportees, as it marked the end of their childhood and the vanishing of their secure world. The violent treatment of their parents was also a turning point in the perception of their parents, seeing their parents being abused. It had a great impact on the children. Prior to deportation, they viewed their parents as omnipotent. And during the deportation, the children began to understand that under the new circumstances, the power of their parents had been reduced to next to nothing. For example, child survivor Joel Alpern speaks of his parents' emotional outburst after their daughter Molly was 14 years old, died during deportation. And he writes, "Seeing our parents crying was very traumatic for us, as we had never seen them crying before. We always knew them as strong and self-assured." His parents tried, but they were ultimately unsuccessful in burying their daughter. And again, this had a great impact on them. And Alpern recalls, while watching his parents with his brothers, say that they looked on with fear, sadness, and anger as they saw the helplessness of their parents. And he said they were abused and degraded to a subhuman level. It had a devastating effect on all of us. These feelings of humiliation, of sadness and pain, they were amplified once these families reached Transnistria. We do not know the exact number of Jewish children who were deported or who survived Transnistria, but according to wartime records, we do know that in the spring of 1943, at least 5,000 Jewish children who lost both parents and 3,000 Jewish children who lost one parent were living in Transnistria. And they lived mostly they were in the Mogilev and the Balta districts. These two were the most populated districts of Transnistria. Following their deportation, Jewish families were placed in this new, dangerous and unfamiliar world in which they lacked freedom. Under the circumstances, the lives of these families revolved around the overcrowded and dilapidated buildings in which they were forced to live. In this new environment, family members faced and struggled to overcome unprecedented situations. In principle, the world of the Jews in Transnistria ended at the barbed wire, and not all of the ghettos in Transnistria were surrounded by barbed wire, but I think most of them were. At least at one point, had barbed wire. In reality, however, the majority of the Jews, including children, often defied danger and ventured outside of their places of confinement to find food and other necessities. Now, we do know that being caught outside the ghetto was extremely dangerous. As stated in Ordinance number 23, which regulated the status of the Jews in Transnistria, a Jew caught outside the ghetto without authorization from the county prefect was considered a spy and sanctioned according to the military laws of war. Therefore, every time children or adults snuck out of their places of confinement, they risked being tried and executed as a spy. As we'll see shortly, some Romanian commanders, they didn't bother to go through this whole trial process. They simply executed people, including children, on the spot. Another monumental change that occurred in the lives of the Jewish children deported to Transnistria was losing the protection of their parents. As we saw earlier, this already started happening during the deportation. Once in Transnistria, the parents of these children were often unable to provide for their offspring, perished due to the appalling living conditions, or died as a consequence of the persecution and brutality inflicted upon them. As a response to the hardships in the ghettos, some children tried to contribute to their family's food supply, and they shared the role of the provider with the adult members of the family. And this is what we call role sharing. Basically what it is, and sociologist Elinor Kroitoru says, is when the pre-war roles of parents were now shared with the children in the family. Sometimes children became the sole providers for their families, and this is what we call role reversal. So basically, it's the complete reversal of the pre-war roles of parents and children. And I will give an example for each of these situations. Shoshana Neumann, we've mentioned her earlier, was 9 years old when she was deported to Transnistria with her family. And she shared responsibilities with her mother. And she did that in a variety of ways. And she helped provide for her family both before and after the death of her father, brother, and sister. So how exactly did she help? Well, we can actually see it here. She collected corn roots outside the Bersha ghetto, seen in the first image. And her mother used these corn roots for heating and for cooking. She also fetched water from the well with her brother and continued to bring water alone after the death of her brother. And that's illustrated in the second image. She stole food from the peasants' horses' food sacks. We see her doing that in the third image. And she collected beets from the peasants' carriages, the beets that fell on the ground. And that's shown in the last image, the fourth one. And if you're interested in these images and seeing these images are from Shoshana Neumann's book, which was published in 2006. And by looking at these images, I also wanted to point out the changes that occurred in her physical appearance during the war years. We can see as the war progressed that it had a great impact on her physical appearance. Children also faced numerous dilemmas while caring for their families in Transnistria. The story of the Valman siblings, who just happened to live under the same roof as Shoshana Neumann and her family, so they lived in the same house in the Bershat ghetto. Their story brings insight into the dilemmas that some children dealt with on a daily basis. After their mother's death, the two brothers, Asriel and Chaim Valman, care for their sick sister and injured father. Because here we have an example of role reversal, right? The children are the ones providing and caring for the adult members of their family. While caring for their father, the two brothers had to wash his injured legs and bind them with a shirt. Asriel Valman states that they could have obtained soup in exchange for the shirts, which they used to bandage the wounds. As the brothers tried their best to feed and nurse their father back to health, choosing between food and bandages was a real dilemma. Ballman writes, on the one hand was salvation, soup. On the other hand, salvation, a shirt for binding the wound. We coped, I and my little brother Chaim, who was only 11 years old, with life and death dilemmas like these every day. Unfortunately, there were children who tried, but they were ultimately unsuccessful in their attempts to help their family survive. It was due to the severe lack of medicine and food in the ghettos. There was nothing more they could have done. Thousands of children lost their parents during this first winter in Transnistria, 1941, 1942. And survivors refer to this first winter as the worst and the coldest winter they have ever experienced. If you actually go and listen to testimonies of Transnistria survivors, no matter where they were located during the war, you'll see they all talk about this first winter as the worst and the coldest winter of their lives. For instance, in the Jewry ghetto on January 3rd, 1942, the temperature, as shown in the wartime diary of Miriam Berkovich, and you might be familiar with her diary, and you can actually see this diary. You can read it on our museum's website, and I'll send the link. So the temperature was reportedly minus 38 degrees Celsius, which is about minus 36 degrees Fahrenheit. This made it impossible to go outdoors, to take a bath, to change clothes, or to stay warm. So it was a very, very difficult winter. And now you might wonder, what happened with those Jewish children who lost their parents during this first terrible winter? Overall, Jewish children who lost their immediate family were either expected to fend for themselves, placed in the care of a foster family, of course, if that option was available. Unfortunately, child survivors had negative experiences with their foster families, or they were taken to an orphanage once these institutions started opening in the spring of 1942. As a result of the combined efforts of the local Jewish committees, so each ghetto had a committee, and the assistance they received from and through Centrala Evreilor din România, the Romanian Jewish Center, or the CER, between 2,500 and 3,000 Jewish children found shelter throughout the war years in the orphanages established in Transnistria. So not all of the orphans were sheltered in orphanages. Some lived outside these institutions. From wartime documentation, we learned that the Jewish committees were overwhelmed. To say they were overwhelmed, it's really an understatement. They were extremely overwhelmed by the number of destitute people in the ghettos. And although the orphans were a priority for the leadership, they lacked the means to provide the orphans with proper and sufficient care. The plight of the Jewish orphans in Transnistria was so dire that news of their situation even made it across the ocean. Several newspapers in the United States reported on this subject throughout the war years. And here we have an article from the Wisconsin Jewish Chronicle. It was published in January 1944. And this article talks mostly about the situation of the orphans in the Mogilev ghetto, and the conditions there were extremely bad. But today, because we do have limited time, I would like to focus on the experiences of those Jewish orphans who were confined to the Bershad ghetto. In the beginning, for a short period of time, Bershad was the largest ghetto in Transnistria. And it was located within the Balta district. And I marked the location of Bershad on this map with the red dot, so you can actually see where it was located. Following the deportation of the Romanian Jews, between 20 and 25,000 people were confined to this ghetto. How many houses do you think existed in this ghetto to shelter all of these people? Well, we know that the ghetto only consisted of 337 houses, which according to survivors were dilapidated and in ruins. So it's really impossible to even imagine the logistics behind this. How can so many people fit into such a small space? At the beginning of December 1941, typhus was discovered in Bershad, and the mortality rate in the ghetto reached its peak in the following months. And typhus claimed the lives of approximately 15,000 people. Some historians say it was less than 15,000 people. I don't think we'll ever know for sure the exact number of victims. It was a large number. That's what we know for sure. Hundreds of children lost their parents in the Bersha ghetto in that first winter. The orphans living on their own or on the streets employed a variety of survival strategies to make ends meet. Some orphans were able to obtain food by working outside the Bersha ghetto. Child survivor Freda Rosenblatt was one of the orphans who found employment with the local Ukrainians. She was 10 years old when she was deported with her family. And after the death of her parents, she and her brother Hersh were placed in the care of a foster family. The foster family stripped them of their belongings, and they eventually decided to take fate into their own hands, and they left their foster family. Rosenblatt eventually ended up working as a babysitter for a Ukrainian woman for a while. Every day, the girl would sneak out of the Bersha ghetto, and she would walk 3 kilometers back and forth to the babysitting job. One day, Rosenblatt and the other inhabitants of the ghetto witnessed the torture and murder of a boy who was caught outside the ghetto by the Romanian commander at the time. Although she was aware that she might share the same fate if she was caught, she continued to sneak out of the ghetto. And she explains her decision and says, I endangered my life because that was the meaning. How will I survive? So we see that the focus here was, how will I survive? The Romanian commander at the time was Florin Gineraru. He was only 23 years old. Both survivor testimonies and records from his trial suggest that he was a brute. Some nicknamed him the Terror. An article published in May 1945 in the newspaper România Liberă mentions that Gineraru's favorite pastime activity was torturing the inhabitants of the ghetto by tying their hands to his motorcycle and dragging them at full speed through the Bershad ghetto. One of these incidents is actually illustrated in one of Shoshana Neumann's post-war drawings, and we see it here. And these type of events are usually remembered by most of the survivors from the Bershad ghetto. As I mentioned, one of Gineraru's victims was a boy who was caught outside the ghetto. He was an orphan and a friend of child survivor Israel Lapchuk. The two boys used to sneak out of the Bersha ghetto, and they would look for food together. Lapchuk recalls in an interview the moment his friend was caught by Gineraru while he managed to escape. And I apologize for the sound. It's not working properly, but you can actually read the transcript on the side. So I apologize for that.
And what happened to the motorcycle? How did it actually happen?
They took a chain. They put him they put the chain by the neck. The chain was went to the motorcycle, and the motorcycle was gone, and then they killed him. That was the way.
Did he have parents?
The thing is that in Bershad was an orphanage, and he came from the orphanage. I was very befriended with the people from the children from the orphanage.
So this boy was reportedly one of the children from the Bershad orphanage. What was he doing? Sneaking outside of the ghetto if he was in an orphanage? Well, let's take a look at the orphanage. Let's talk about it. Let's see what happened inside the orphanage that might have caused this. According to correspondence between the Jewish committee in Bershad and the CER in Romania, Centrala Evreilor din România, an orphanage opened in this ghetto in May 1942. The first document shown here mentions this event and states that only children aged 8 years old and younger were admitted into the institution. However, if you know anything about Transnistria, then you know that rules did not always apply, or they did not always match the reality, because eventually the orphanage sheltered orphans of all ages. Usually the older ones were responsible for the younger ones. They would take care of them. And they had an additional role. At first, the orphanage was located in a small and shabby building, and the living conditions were dire. Some children slept on wooden platforms. Others slept on the floor, where sometimes rats nibbled at them while sleeping. In the first months of its existence, the orphanage was unable to provide medical care for the children. One of the caretakers, Trude Malik, recalls that some of the children were so weak they could not walk, and others had their bones glued together. This was not a singular case by any means. I just want to mention that this happened in most of Transnistria's Jewish orphanages. Poor hygiene led to a lice infestation and scabies. Child survivor Ruth Glasberg-Gold explains that children in the Bershad orphanage spend their time grooming each other, and says that we were sitting like monkeys, delousing each other, squishing out the parts. We had scabies, infected scabies. We could not wash, we could not change. We did not have clothes until the last moment. Also in the early stages of the institution, the food served in the orphanage was insufficient. And I don't think it was ever sufficient even later when more aid started arriving. I don't think it could ever be considered sufficient. 6 months after the opening of the orphanage, the Jewish committee in Bershad reported they had no funding left for the orphanage, soup kitchen, and hospital. And you can see that's mentioned here in the second document. By the way, these are documents from our museum's archives. In November 1942, when the orphanage sheltered 165 children, the committee continued to send desperate appeals to the CER in Romania. In this letter, they write, "Because winter arrived earlier, we urgently ask you to make efforts in order to accelerate providing the aid we greatly need in these difficult times. The current situation makes it impossible for our institutions, such as the hospital, the soup kitchen, and the orphanage, to deal with all the urgent needs, given the great number of the sick and hungry people, as well as the orphan children." As I said, more consistent aid started arriving, more precisely in 1943. Subsequently, the Jewish orphanage in Bershad moved to a larger building. It was located near the Dolina River. The living conditions slightly improved, but it was still not great. Because, as we just learned, the children sheltered in the orphanage did not receive adequate care from this institution, we must turn our attention to the strategies employed by these children to increase their chances of survival while in the orphanage. And I want to mention that this photograph is actually not from Bershad, it's from Mogilev. And it's a wartime photograph of a Jewish child He was sheltered in one of the orphanages in Mogilev. But I wanted to include it because it shows the physical condition of the orphans at the time. Not only in Bershad, but in most orphanages, Jewish children employed a variety of strategies that helped them cope with their condition and life in Transnistria. Through their actions, they tried to improve their physical condition and to raise their morale. A child survivor, Israel Renner Ron, recalls that while in the Bershad orphanage, and I quote, "Each one of us had to take care for himself for some more food. We slept there and during the day wandered around the city." He also took advantage of the orphanage's location. As I said, it was near a river, and he went fishing. He says that he enjoyed fishing and he used to fish before the war in Chernovets. So he did have some experience with it. He says, "I made my own fishing rod and would fish crabs, fish, and cook them right on the spot." So we see here that the location of the orphanage played an important role in the options available for children to provide for themselves. The children also smuggled food into the orphanage, and as a result, an exchange system developed inside this institution. And just to make clear, it wasn't just in this institution, most of the orphanages. Trading goods was a daily occurrence in the Bershad orphanage. The children from the institution also exchanged goods with the orphans who lived outside the orphanage. Asriel Valman's brother, Chaim, and if you remember, we talked about them. It was the two siblings taking care of their injured father. After their father passed away, Chaim used to receive food from the orphanage. And he exchanged goods with Miriam and Adela, two of the girls living in the orphanage. Valman says that for a kind of oily material produced from sunflower seeds, makuch, he received a piece of bread. Some orphans learn how to use their voice to either sing in exchange for food or to beg inside or outside the ghettos. And this was a means by which they supplemented the meals they received in the orphanages. The children who lived in the Bershad orphanage came from various regions and backgrounds, right? These were communities deported from Bessarabia, Bukovina, northern Moldova. While in this institution, they sought and found support amongst themselves, because who else could better grasp the enormity of being an orphan Jewish child in Transnistria than someone who went through a similar experience? These orphans were brought together under the same roof by cruel fate, and their common suffering was the cement that solidified their relationship. And this is confirmed by child survivors, and they say there was a feeling of friends and comrades in misery while in the Bershad orphanage. Child survivors also speak of the ways they supported each other while in this institution. Ruth Glasberg-Gold recalls there was camaraderie, there was helping each other. We shared what we had. The able one would massage the feet of the unable one, and the boys would go out and crack the river open to bring water for us to heat. She also says that if it was not for the orphanage, bad as it was, miserable, indescribable, unimaginable, if it were not for being together with children of the same faith, I don't think I would be here today, honestly. Another venue that helped orphans alleviate their suffering was their involvement in social and cultural events, and Patricia talked a bit about that in her presentation, and we see it happening here as well. The orphanages organized activities such as musical and theatrical performances, and through these events, they raised money for the orphans in their care. So what happened here? Well, the inhabitants of the ghettos would pay for a ticket, or they would make a donation if they couldn't afford a ticket, and they would attend these events. the children housed in our orphanages, they found comfort in activities such as singing, dancing, and performing. And this is why it's important to work with video testimonies of survivors, because once you get to this part of the interview, you can actually see their entire demeanor just changes. They're so proud of their performances while in the orphanages. It's really, as in contrast to what happened before, losing their parents and all of that, it's really, you can see them, they change on the camera. Most child survivors who lived in the Bershad orphanage recall singing, and they remember their cantor, Israel Pesati, and I included a picture of him from his younger years. Pesati was from Shadagura, and he studied music at the conservatory in Vienna. He organized a choir and taught the children from the Bershad orphanage to sing songs in Yiddish and Hebrew. He was respected and admired by the orphans, and to this day, the orphans they speak so highly of him. Although the children performed while wearing potato sacks because they had no other clothing, they found comfort in singing, and some of the songs spoke of their experiences. Ruth Gasper-Gold says that being part of a choir was her salvation. She felt empowered by singing because this helped her overcome the feeling of stigmatization endured at the hands of the Romanian authorities. She explains, "When I was singing, I felt that some spiritual elevation took me out from the dumpster, garbage, because you are made into garbage. You are made into vermin. That's the way you are made to feel." Through singing, children found a way to express themselves, to sing their sorrows, and also share their experiences with the inhabitants of the ghettos. In November 1943, Ion Antonescu authorized the repatriation to Romania of those Jewish children who were aged 15 years old and younger and who lost both parents in Transnistria. At the end of February 1944, the orphans from northern Transnistria gathered in Mogilev, while those from southern Transnistria, including Bershad, they were taken to Balta. And this is where they awaited their repatriation to Romania. The repatriation was an event that forced some orphans to make crucial decisions. Some children who were not on the repatriation list agreed to separate from their siblings who were on the repatriation list. And this was a very difficult decision because most times their siblings were the only other surviving members of their family. But they hoped that if their siblings returned to Romania, then they would have better chances of survival than by staying in Transnistria. Other children refused to leave Transnistria without their siblings. For example, Mia Lande recalls how even though her siblings were also on the repatriation list, and we see them all here on this list, the Romanian authorities denied them access to the train. Lande refused to leave without her siblings and got off the train. She says, "As we were counted to go into the trains, it happened that at that point they started to have problems because there were too many children. So they knew that some children don't belong there. I was already on the train, but they didn't let in my sister and my brother. So I came out from the train because if my sister wouldn't go, I wouldn't go, or my brother." Children like Lande and her siblings were brought into Balta. They were soon caught in the crossfire between the advancing Red Army and the retreating German army. So basically they were caught on the front line. The orphans left behind lived in hiding until liberation. And this is something that it's not talked about a lot. Mia Lande talks about the atmosphere in Balta at that time and says that is where I saw rape. That is where I saw killing more and more. I was hiding my brother. I was hiding my sister. The whole city was on fire. Well, Lande and her siblings were not repatriated to Romania, and they were stuck in Transnistria until liberation. Over 1,900 Jewish orphans were permitted to return to Romania in March 1944. A repatriation list shows that a number of 241 orphans from the Berșad ghetto returned to Romania at that time. And survivors state that many of the children from the Berșad orphanage were repatriated to Romania. Some of these orphans reached Eretz Israel in 1944. Others were taken back over the Dniester, this time in the Odessa area, so to Soviet Ukraine in the Odessa area, and to the Soviet Union, more precisely the Donbas area, in December 1944. I hope you found this presentation interesting. Thank you for your attention, and I will add it to the chat a few links and some information on our research services at the museum. Thank you.
Thank you, Ionela. Really fascinating. I was looking in the chat box. There was one question. Somebody was asking about, I think the question was, it says the date, the winter temperature, but what the temperature was in the winter of 41. I don't know if you have that type of information. It's interesting, you know what kind of conditions the children were under. But there was another question that someone else tried to answer about the CER. Who were these people? How did they operate? How did they get aid to the orphanage? So Elinor answered the question, but maybe you want to add something more to what he wrote as far as how this actually worked in the Jewish community, helping the orphanage. Because he writes that it's very similar to the Judenrat, and that's a very interesting point. If you also see it as a type of Judenrat, or maybe see it in a different type of situation. And again, if there's anybody else that wants to add a question, please feel free. And Ionela, if you have anything to add about the work with the CER, how it was organized, who they were they similar to a Judenrat?
Yeah, so the CER was actually in Romania. The Federation of the Jewish Communities was dissolved in December of 1941, and it was replaced by Centrala Evreilor din România, the Romanian Jewish Center. Basically, if someone in Romania wanted to send money or any assistance to their families in Transnistria, they had to go through this institution in order to do that. And also the institution itself, the organization itself, used to raise money for the deported Jews in Transnistria. And there were several offices, but there was a specific group of people, a specific department that it was called the assistance department that dealt with this type of assistance. And there were many issues with this because the assistance did not arrive on time. Sometimes it took months for packages to arrive to the Jews in Transnistria. And that's why it's looking over the correspondence, we can see how desperate the Jewish committees in the ghettos were, because they knew they were supposed to receive aid and the aid wasn't there, and they just didn't know how to keep these institutions open. It was a big issue. Sometimes on the road, someone would steal from these packages and they opened the box and the aid wasn't there. So yeah, so this is a bit of a short story on the role of this, but the CR was in Romania, so it wasn't in Transnistria. And also in the January or February 1943, a delegation of the CR was able to visit Transnistria. So I think that's where they started to understand what's happening there, because it was really difficult to even imagine the situation. And in the letters, the committees explained how bad it was. But until they got there and saw it with their own eyes, I don't think they were able to actually understand how dire the situation was.
Thank you. I think what's incredible, I mean, I know the experience of the orphanage in the Warsaw Ghetto with Janusz Korczak, and there were many. But because we have the survivors, the child survivors, and their testimonies, we really have an insider's view of what was happening. And I wonder how much we don't know about the actual physical condition and mental condition of the children in orphanages and other places where they were actually deported and didn't survive. So this is really not only a micro history, but it maybe gives us a look at the more macro history of what happened to children that were specifically put into orphanages that had lost their parents, or didn't have anyone to take care of them. And sometimes we don't know what their experiences were unless we find a diary hidden if it wasn't destroyed. So because of that, really, Ionela, thank you so much for your research. And thank you for the links, because actually someone was asking if they can get the links sent through the email. And I will try to find a way to send out links through the email that all the participants receive, our whole mailing list. So I will try to get that out as well. It's very late, and I'm kind of debating because Dalia Ofer is with us, and she really wanted to have a moment to say something. And if we don't have other questions, actually there is one question I'm looking at now. There was actually something about psychotherapy for the children later as survivors. So that's an interesting question. But if Dalia, I see you're still here. I don't know how to unmute you. Ask to unmute, and I will let you talk in a moment. But the question is about getting psychotherapy after the Holocaust. This question is for Patricia and Ionela. I think it doesn't just concern Romania. So if one of you want to answer, or both of you.
I can start. That really depends on where the child ends up.
Mm.
I read an excellent book on the small children who survived, because for them we really don't have a lot of material. Small children don't write diaries like teenagers and adults, and there was really sort of this feeling that the children were somehow broken in a way, and that they had to fix this kind of brokenness. But I don't know how much psychotherapy was given. We don't know in a lot of cases what happened to children in retrospect, unless we have post-war testimony about their time after survival. Do you know anything, Ionela?
I'm afraid not. I think that the Orphans, once they reached Eretz Israel, their focus was mostly on building their new lives, and they talk about that. And those who were sent to Soviet Ukraine, the Soviet, then again, I don't know what happened to them there. I highly doubt it that they received any.
Yeah. And of course, you don't have the kind of therapy or the view of therapy, psychotherapy, and sort of the talk therapy that we have today, and so it's very difficult to say, especially on an individual basis. But I think most children were just kind of told to get, just as Ionela said, to get on with their lives, to start building again, rather than to deal with that trauma. I think we understand more today about what trauma does to the psyche than they did in those days. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, I think I also don't have any answer for my own research, but I know that getting testimony was very important. And one of the things that Ionela said is that while you see testimonies later, and it's not the first time they give testimony, these video testimonies are probably who knows how many times, how their faces change as they tell their story. But the child testimonies that Greta was talking about, and also Ionela, the point was to get the information down and not really to question, like you mentioned, about the rape and about the attacks and about the starvation, but where you were, what happened next, and get like a more, kind of a general understanding through a specific child. So yeah, I can imagine. And I think people maybe were just, not able to ask those questions. For women as well, when they were giving testimony, they weren't asked those questions, or about humor during the Holocaust. So I imagine with the children, it's the same idea. So thank you for your answer. Is Dalia here? I asked you to unmute if you want to say something.
Well, I'm afraid that
you.
it's, yeah, well, yeah, hi. Thank you, everybody, for the presentation. I think it's really too late and I'll give up. I mean, I think that some categories and the way you have to divide the children to different groups, and in Transnistria, we have different groups who were deported. It's very different than the Serbian or the people who came from Chernovich or from other areas. So I think that and the different ghettos in the north and Bersha that was mentioned here. So I'm afraid that what I want to say is too long, and thank you anyhow. And what is important is to go on and study and research, and I'm glad that people are doing it. I did it in the past, I still do it, and we just published a diary in Moreshet that we call it Dapim Sordim, survival pages, which is parts of thoughts, poems, diaries of teenagers. And one is from Transnistria, which is a longer one. So there is a lot to study, there is a lot to learn, and it's good that we have the materials, and good luck to everybody. And better times for us in this country. We need it very much.
We do. By the way, someone did add something about getting psychotherapy. They did get some psychotherapeutic help, and there's a book that came out in 1946. So if you're looking in the chat box, thank you so much.
It's Isactor. I know what it is.
Yeah.
But my impression was that he was mostly there to study the children. That was my impression. And it was also very, I don't know how to say this. There was a lot of propaganda. You could see he was leaning to a certain side. And yes, I am aware of that study.
Oh, thank you for adding that comment. So like Dalia said, it is very late here in Israel. I could continue on, but I know that many people in Europe and Israel, it's very late for them. So I want to thank all of our speakers today. First of all, thank you so much for this incredible program. To Elinor from A.M.I.R. for giving the opening remarks. You're doing incredible work there, and congratulations on your new position. To Greta, as always, bringing Romania to, our programs through the Ghetto Fighters Archives, which Ionela also used in part of her research, and she was an intern there. So thank you, Greta, for your presentation. Ionela, Patricia, thank you. I think it was a wonderful combination. Thank you so much for suggesting each other and putting together this program. And of course, Greta, as many of you already know, if you've come to all 4 programs, was an important part of putting together this program. She isn't just in the archives giving a presentation. She helped to put together each program, and we had 5 altogether. And our last program, sadly, is in 2 weeks. I put in the link at the beginning and also at the end. So anyone who wants to register can register. Everyone here is going to get an email to register for that program as well. And I invite you to that program because we also have a pre-screening of the movie Gestures of Resistance, Berger Stefan. And I think that's a very important part of how do we remember everything that Ionela is researching and Michael is researching and others. Okay, but how do we remember? What do we remember? What do we forget? As hinted to, what's our goal in remembering? So I think it'll be a very interesting program, post-communist Romania, something that I know nothing about. So for me, it'll be an incredible program. And I want to thank our audience again, and those of you that stayed until the end, because there's always that time when people leave. Thank you for staying, and I hope to see everyone in 2 weeks. And as Dalia said, hopefully more peaceful times. It's not very easy today in Israel. For me, coming to do this program is a way to kind of escape. It sounds ridiculous to say that, but to talk about the Holocaust and say that's an escapism. But I'm glad that we were able to have the program today and to meet with everyone and have these incredible speakers. So shalom to everyone and have a peaceful day and evening. And for the fathers here, happy Father's Day. You deserve it. Shalom.